right, let's go. Good morning, everybody. Let's see what's going on. So we did have some news out of the Middle East. Um, there was some news where Trump was saying that, geez, I don't even really want to cover it. Um, Apparently there's some stuff with the Middle East in Iran where we are trying to take steps to, see some peace. However, I don't think that's really true because we're sending 4,500 more Marines over there, plus another strike group, while we're sitting here saying that we want peace with the Middle East and everything else, or, with Iran. Sorry, just a lot to go over this morning. Anyway, aside from that, we're going to kind of ignore the news for the moment. I want to delete some of these lines just so that we can start determining a scalp. Now, with the 5 minute time frame, we still do not have an entry just yet, so we're good. We can sit here and talk for a little bit. We will be looking for either a call to the upside or a put to the downside. Now, before we even really engage on that though, we're going to determine, are we going to see this inverse cup close? Because this can turn essentially into an inverse cup and handle there. So that's what we're looking for first, because again, I don't think that this news is, fully true. I do know that we're pausing the strikes for a few days, but again, I don't know how long that's going to last or anything else. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Um, so yeah, enough rambling. I'm not sure about the news currently, whether we can trust it or not, but from the structure side of things, let's see if we can get this push downward. Now, I do want to take a look at the VVIX this morning. Of course, it's going to pull down quite a bit as we did have that major gap upward. However, it pulled down to 121.15. It's at 122.12, so we will be watching that fairly close to see if we start climbing up further or pulling back down. Currently, it is starting to climb back up. 5 minute time frame. We are starting to close this cup or this inverse cup to the downside. So this would be a very nice call position for that mid-band support. Again, we're going to be taking calls from the lower Bollinger to the middle Bollinger and exiting there. We will wait until we actually push into the lower Bollinger here. I apologize for all the drawings on the screen right now. Lower Bollinger is currently at the 655.84. So we still have, roughly a whole dollar and a half to head downward before we start entering into any calls. Hold on, I do want to make sure that I have the news open. And I'm just watching the unusual whales news currently, as that pretty much covers everything. Okay. Just getting my bearings. Apologize for the late start, everybody. So give me a few minutes. I just want to kind of look over everything. Again, our VVIX opened at 121.15, or, pulled down to that level. We are looking for, whether this is going to continue pushing downward for the day or start heading back upward. So far, we are seeing a little bit of buying. Nothing super convincing. If we see the bounce here, from the lower Bollinger, with it not pushing that level fully, it didn't really give the quality call upside. Even if they take this middle Bollinger level, which is currently basically right at that 659, then I'd still just be holding out. Uh, with this inverse cup closing, I am expecting this to push down further, start forming bearish structure, and that would give us our call, or excuse me, bullish structure, and that would give us our call opportunity to the upside. If they give us the entry, we'll be looking for that. Now, for the puts from last week, okay, because I know some of us are still holding some of those puts. Now, of course, those positions are red. I am still gonna hold on to those positions as currently the SPY is retesting the 5 mile range. And I just want to quickly go over this while we do have a few seconds. 5 mile is currently at the 658.59. So basically right where the high of the day was, the 658.38. So we're retesting the 5 mile. Um, from the technical standpoint, this is fully expected, even though it didn't happen during the intraday, obviously due to the news. But with that said, this was still the move we were looking for. We were looking for the lower low of the bottom Bollinger Day 2, and from that lower low, pulling up and seeing the 5 mile. So currently testing that level, and give me one moment. I need to open my door so my cat doesn't rip up my carpet. One second, everybody. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, so on the 5 minute time frame, and I do want to hide the moving averages. I want to make this very, very clear. All right, so it does look like we are going to attempt to pull up towards the 20 mile, which is currently at the 659.11. From that range, I am looking for a rejection to the downside. Now, I am not going to be taking a put at this position. Again, I do, my targets are only the lower and upper Bollingers. So it would be positions like this. Let's do it that and like that. So it would be something like that. Um, go ahead. Let's make this very, very clear. Apologize for all these other lines and everything. I will get the charts cleaned up later today. But again, for our entries, we are looking for either the upper Bollinger to take a put to the downside for that 20 mile range, or we're looking for the bottom Bollinger to take the calls to the upside. So looking for one or the other. We don't want to be taking positions at the 20 mod to the downside, even though we have a very, very large potential of a head and shoulders forming here. Again, we do have some bearish structure within the day. Even though we did have a major gap upward, we do have this inverse cup and handle formed. So if we see the continuation within this right shoulder to the downside, that would be a pretty large downside because we do have a large liquidity gap there. And if the market is aiming to push for that, then that would be aiming Very, very likely for that lower low of the day two Bollinger, even though we did get it in the pre-market. Now, with us finally hitting that 5 mile range, and this is the 5 mile on the daily time frame again, adding the drawings. 5 mile is currently at the 658.86. So with us being at the 659.18, we're pretty much right at that level. Now, from this level, I know that many of us might be trying to expect some downside. Again, I do have puts. I do expect downside, but from the day two bottom Bollinger, we truly do expect upside consolidation. And, even though the news brought it 2 hours early, um, this is sort of the move we were looking for. And from this move, we are looking for the 20 mile on the daily time frame. Okay, so today was a little shifty in terms of our dated positions because we did want to take really nice dated calls. I actually had a full watch list prepared um, for this. However, we got kind of screwed out of the move. So, with that said, our next target from this 5 mile range truly is the 672. So, we will be looking to open dated calls for that. Okay. 5 minute time frame, still no entry yet. Again, potentially building that shoulder and taking a look at the VVIX. We are seeing it pull down to basically new lows of the day, which can be a bullish signal for the market overall. However, it is within this lower Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame, which that does sort of allude to, okay, now we can pull back upward towards that 20 mile on the 5 minute time frame, which for the VVIX would be a whole $7 to the upside. That would be very, very bearish for the market. That would suggest quite a lot of downside, which would be this little arrow right there. So, um, that's what we're looking to see if we're going to, have that play out. Again, we're just waiting for our entry. Now, this head and shoulders here doesn't look like that right shoulder is fully forming. However, that is the type of liquidity we need to push downward. This is the 5 minute time frame, so we don't need a massive right shoulder to do the trick. Um, just that little push into the 20 mile there, that 659 range can be enough to push us downward. So we'll see if that occurs. The ADL on the 5 minute time frame is basically neutral. We did have it pulled downward, pull back up. It is pulling downward again, slightly pulling upward. But in terms of the overall day, it is still negative. So kind of a misleading signal in terms of showing strength or weakness. This technically should be showing weakness to the downside. Now, on the 30-minute time frame, and this is what I did want to show, is that very, very, very likely here is that we can be forming some form of cup and handle. Okay. If that is what is occurring, if we are trying to pull downward on the day to form the upside, then we will be looking to basically exit the majority of the puts that we are currently holding. And that will be when we enter the calls. Now, I will share the watch list of what calls we are looking for, but just making sure we're all on the same game plan here. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, I want to get this watch list shared, so hold on. Very, very likely seeing this right shoulder build out here. And I do apologize for all the messy drawings. I will get the charts cleaned up for tomorrow, or not tomorrow's stream, but for Wednesday's stream. Okay, I do want to just show the screen temporarily while I do figure out a way to share the watch list with everybody. Yes, I am taking pictures on my phone. Hold on. Still just waiting for an entry, so completely fine here. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and post this in the alien chat in the Discord, but I will be forwarding it into the trade chat, so just give me a second, everybody. And I highly suggest adding these to your watch lists or creating a new watch list and adding some of these in there. Now, I'm not suggesting taking all of these. That's not the point of the watch list. It is kind of a pick and choose, determine or based on what you can, afford to purchase and everything else and what you're really looking forward to out of a contract. Now, there is a mix of tech calls in here, semiconductors. UPro is based off of the actual S&P, but we have had a lot of success trading that in the past. Now, let me take a look at the VVIX. All right, I went ahead and shared the watch list on the Discord. Let me actually go ahead and post that in our chat really quick. I'm able to. No, I'm not. If somebody could do that for me, that'd be great. Scalping the higher volatility here. I'm not too interested in taking that downside yet, even though potentially it could be extremely good here. The news does support, upside buying on the day. Now, I do want to take a look at the corporate credit and everything else, and that'll give us a much better signal on if we're going to be seeing true buying on the day or not. But I'm really not wanting to take a scalp to the downside. Terms of trying to scalp that high V. Okay, yeah, let's take a look at HIG. Take a look at liquid. So on HIG, we do see a little bit of buying here, and by a little bit, that is quite a lot of bit for HIG. Um, Essentially a whole 90 cents of upside within HIG there. Potentially some bullish structure. Now in the time and sales, again, I only monitor anything with 1,000 shares or more. So I am seeing a lot of selling in the actual time and sales out of HIG. That doesn't mean a whole lot because the ETF is balanced through the fund itself. So um, that selling may not mean a whole lot, but it is something I am seeing. Liquid, we are seeing a little bit of buying as well. We will see if they aim to close this cup back up to the 108.70. So we will be looking for that. Sorry for the janky cup. Now, potentially, and I do want to show this on QQQ because we do have far less drawings and it will be correlating through the SPY as well. So if we're going to be seeing upside buying here, this can create this bullish cup, even though potentially we did have this, you know, potential head and shoulder, or not head and shoulders, inverse up and handle on SPY that we were looking at earlier. But if we see the buying take all the way back up, or QQQ, this would be the 593.72. So just a little shy under a dollar for us to hit that range, then we would be taking puts because from that upside cup, we would be expecting, you know, it's to the downside from the upper Bollinger to that 20 mile range within SPY. Do you want to hide the drawings for a moment? Now, even though this is pushing above what this, potential left shoulder would be, this still can be right shoulder liquidity if we don't see it push all the way back up to the high of the day. I don't want to say high of the day because the true high of the day was far higher, but I am looking towards that 661.84 range. So if we don't start having a pretty much major rejection in this range very, very soon here, then we should be looking for that cup to close to the upside. Our VVIX has been pulling down still. It pulled all the way down to $119 dollars and 13 cents. It is up to the $119 and 36 cents. So a little bit of chop. Now, again with the VVIX, just to quickly cover this, if it is above the $98 range, then that means, there is selling taking place. It is a little misleading though, because we have just been pulling back the entire time from this morning. So, um, usually this would be a very, very bullish signal, but in the current context, we do need to see a little bit further time for that to develop. Now, the DXY should be down, but I want to see if it's starting to gain a little bit of weight. So it did pull down all the way to the $99.11, back up to 99.29. QQQ seeing a little bit of a rejection here. So again, that can be that head and shoulders. Even though it does look a little lopsided, it still has the liquidity for it. As long as we see that, translate through SPY as well, if we see the rejection within this right shoulder. I posted it to the trading chat, but let me go ahead and forward it to general as well. There we go. It's in general as well. Okay, let me see. Question on the daily, the moving averages are roughly plus or minus $2. What's our spread on the 5 minute? No, not a dumb question at all. Okay, so that's a perfectly reasonable question. Okay, so the question is basically with the 5 mile being at this, we're going to call it essentially right at this 659. Okay. With it being at that 659, we can test the full $2 upside above that, because with the moving average, even with the news and everything else today, we still have the upper and lower bounds of each of the moving averages. So with the 5 mile, that does bring the upper bounds all the way to that 661. Okay. And the lower bounds to that 657. So with the low of the day being at that 656.07, that does give us some of that lower bounds testing. So potentially we can be seeing a 5 mile test to the upside today. Our VVIX is still pulling downward, so this is a bullish signal so far. And if we do not see major rejection in this range, then it will be very, very likely aiming to form this cup to the upside. Apologize for all the drawings. Usually I have it a little cleaner, but not today. So keeping a very, very close eye on the VVIX here. Now, it is still pulling downward slightly, so we should be expecting this breakout to the 661.89. Basically, that's 662. Um, Again, if we don't see a major rejection here, that will be the case. So far, our VVIX is telling us that that will be occurring. It is unfortunate that we didn't get the very opportune entry into the calls to the upside today, if that is the case, because that would have been, you know, that 650, 679 towards whatever the high of the day will be. So hopefully they do pull down and give us a true entry, but so far, nothing, at least for, what I take within my rules. Always only enter within the upper or lower Bollinger. That is good to take a look at. Yes, USO. So pull down to the 109 in the, let's see, hold on. Now, if USO sees some buying here, now we do see some pretty obvious bear structure here, okay? So if we see continuation of this structure, then that will be telling us that oil will be heading down quite a bit. However, I do want to make this purple because this is bearish structure. What tends to happen quite often with these inverse cup handles is that they tend to fail, create bullish cups to the upside. So we will be taking a look at that to see if that is what occurs. VVIX still pulling down, but seeing a little chop. So seeing that chop within potentially that right shoulder of SPY as well. Still seeing our VVIX pulling down to new lows of the day. So that is telling us that very, very likely dealers are trying to position towards the upside. Yep, seeing that upside push. But it still just isn't pushing enough to invalidate the bear structure yet. USO continuing to pull downward. So we are looking to see if, again, this does complete that inverse cup handle to the downside. On the 1 minute time frame, we do have this very nice head and shoulders formed on USO. So that is very likely telling us that we are going to be heading downward in terms of the price of oil. Seeing quite a bit of sells within the time it sells as well, but that's not super indicative of anything right this moment. VVIX really starting to pull downward on the day. Should be almost certain that this is going to complete this bullish cup to the upside, which again will create that opportunity for us to short from the top of the cup. It will create the the conditions where we're looking for that bearish structure, looking for something to create the handle downward so that, if we're going to see the bullish structure complete, grab that liquidity and head upward. So that's what we're looking for currently. However, with that said, this is still not validating this previous head and shoulders. It looks wonky, but this is still holding that liquidity, so we do have to be very careful. Our VVIX pulled downward quite a bit and is now up a whole 30 cents again, which that doesn't seem like a whole lot when we've been pulling down multiple dollars, but starting to pull up multiple cents is telling you directly that dealers are hedging their positions. It works a little differently on the downside for VVIX because that can simply mean that dealers are just not purchasing the insurance. But every penny to the upside means that a dealer has purchased insurance. Okay, so we do watch any upside movement. Okay, it is very, very important to watch. Um, USO continuing to pull downward, so continuing to complete that bearish structure. SPY, very difficult so far. To me, it still looks like we can head downward and complete this head and shoulders. So big, we are seeing a little bit of selling, which that can be alluding to selling within equities. So QQQ, we did not fully complete this cup and handle here. 1 minute time frame just to better show that. On the 1 minute time frame, actually, that looks like a head and shoulders and potentially creating a new structure off of that. So we'll see. Back to SPY. Very indecisive here. When we hold that 20 mile range on the 5 minute time frame, it just means extremely, extremely indecisive price action. That means there is quite a lot of buying and quite a lot of selling going on at the same time, or neither. So, um, but in this case, it does seem that selling is starting to pick back up. Our VVIX is starting to pull back up again. It is back up at the 118 and 40 cents. TLT, don't really want to talk about that just this moment. So we are looking for this downside push. Now again, this downside push can be a fairly large downside push, um, depending on what the dealers are really trying to accomplish here. But what we're looking for is again just to take the call upside. So we will be looking for the lower Bollinger on the 5 minute time frame, which currently that's at the 656.80. So not too much further down from where we're currently located. Yes, I will take a look at Microsoft. Thank you. And you're very welcome for VIG. Yeah, it was something I didn't pay attention to until I want to say about 3, 4 years ago. And ever since then, it's been an extremely, extremely important indicator for me. It tells you what the big money is really doing. So I do like to pay attention to it. And liquid as well. Uh, Sort of works like the HIG, but it is a bit of a tighter spread compared to the HIG. So um, it can be a little misleading, but I do like to look at the HIG and liquid, com- together. Microsoft here, this does look like a head and shoulders on the 5-minute time frame. 1-minute time frame, it shows us potentially head and shoulders, but we do have a very deep groove in there. Validation of multiple structures here. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm looking at. This is why it's throwing me off, and this is Microsoft. We have this inverse cup, okay, but then that gets invalidated by potentially this bullish cup. I do want to label this really quick, which so far is being invalidated because it is breaking downward. Okay, so um, this structure that's supposed to be a cup validated right in here basically. So that's misleading. So bear structure canceled out, bull structure canceled out, bull structure canceled out. Now working on bear structure again. Okay, Microsoft. QQQ. Still potentially seeing this very, very lopsided right shoulder forming. Now in SPY, if we see the 5-minute 20 MA reject here, that would be very indicative of this right shoulder playing out to the downside. Our VVIX is at 118.54 or 57, excuse me. So that has been pulling up from that low of the day. It is tapering from that lower Bollinger as well, which, that is alluding to pulling up towards that 20 MA. 20 MA is at the 125 on VVIX, so full $7 upside there. SPY starting to falter in here, so again, potentially that could be our right shoulder. Microsoft, what are you doing? It's actually looking like it wants to form a large inverse cup here, but that might just be biased thinking. But this is looking like it's wanting to break down. Now, semiconductors, let's check semiconductors. So semiconductors are looking pretty bullish in here. Time. So we have the cup, the handle. This handle does get rejected. We form an additional cup here, and now potentially forming a handle to the upside. So we will be watching for that. Does look extremely likely. However, with semiconductors on the 5-minute time frame pulling up to the 5-minute or pulling up to the upper Bollinger already, that can create the conditions to pull downward. So we will be watching for that. 1-minute time frame here on SPY. Apologize for all the drawings. We can be seeing a smaller head and shoulders here. I will circle back to the VVIX and oil in a second, but this smaller head and shoulders can be pulling us down to that 656. So I am looking for that. That does look very strong. That would complete that right shoulder on the 5-minute time frame. Now, oil, let's check oil. So pulled down all the way to timer's blocking this. Hold on. Pulled down all the way to the 109.59. It is starting to rise again. Now, I do want to check the unusual whales news in just a second here. Now, VVIX is pulling down very slightly. So it did pull up all the way to that 118, basically 40, 118.60 range, and is now at the 118.17. So a little bit of chop in there. SPY, I want to check the 1-minute time frame. We are watching to see if this head and shoulders is invalidated or not. If we pull back up to the 660.70, that will be telling us that the 1-minute head and shoulders here is invalidated. If we reject in here, then that will be telling us that that head and shoulders is good. So we are looking for that. It is looking like it does want to reject this head and shoulders, but we need to wait until the price action actually hits. IX, where are you? Right, so 118.29. Seeing a little bit of that upside still. Q potentially looks like it's trying to form again that cup, trying to build some of this bullish structure in here. It's not completed though yet. So as long as that doesn't complete, this is still telling us that we can be seeing some of these head and shoulders on SPY. Now it does look like we validated. Yes, we did. Okay, so we did invalidate this 1-minute time frame head and shoulders. So we can look for that cup from the top of this 1-minute time frame cup. I am looking for a handle to the downside. Now they should be aiming to finish this cup at the 662. Now VVIX still holding very elevated. Oil is still starting to climb. Now, did we see QQQ close this cup? Did not. It looks like it did, but with it being 12 cents off the top, that is technically enough for it to be a rejection. Expected to pull up slightly. We will be watching it to see if it continues rejecting downward. Now, I do want to look at Bitcoin here, because generally Bitcoin is fairly indicative of what the rest of equities wants to do. Get the drawings here on Bitcoin. Now, the 30-minute time frame does look good. It does look like it's trying to complete this cup and handle. Have the handle forming right there. Now, this can continue breaking out, but even within this handle, I am still looking for an additional handle to the upside. So potentially we can see some rejection within Bitcoin. That rejection, while I would be expecting it to be at the 20-mile range, which is almost exactly at the 71,000, it can take us to the lower Bollinger on the 5-minute time frame. That would take us all the way down towards that 70,000. So we will be looking for that. Circle back to the HIG and liquid. Liquid's a little bit of buying. HIG, we're seeing a pretty decent amount of buying. Not fully invalidating some of this previous bear structure just yet. But if we see HIG pull up basically to that 79.80 range, it will be starting to form bullish structure to the upside. Semiconductors having that cup and handle breakout. So we are expecting a rejection within semiconductors. Do that. Let's check SPY. SPY should be pushing upward. Yeah, it's pushing upward, so it is invalidating this head and shoulders. So we can go ahead and start deleting some of this bearish structure. Now we did have that smaller 1-minute time frame cup and handle, so very likely this downside here is to complete that. Yeah, extremely likely we see this 662 play out. Now our 5 mile on the daily time frame is pushing up with this buying occurring. Is currently at the 659.28. So technically we're still within the upper bounds of that 5 mile range. Now, when we get this push upward, we will be looking to take puts to the downside. We'll be targeting the 5-minute 20 mile, which currently is at the 659.71. Now, our entry on these calls, let's see, exact level. Okay, so we're looking for, again, the upper Bollinger, but the top of this cup is basically right at that 661.98. So we're going to call it 662. The upper Bollinger on the 5-minute time frame is at the 662.26. So that would be alluding to building this bearish structure above top of the cup like we expect to give us our put position to the downside. Okay, so I want to start looking at some puts here. So 1 second, everybody. I'm Okay, for these SPY puts, we are looking for the 20 month, so you can take anything from, basically up. I'm jumbling my words up. Any of the puts above the 658 are basically going to be really good. Okay. Um, so for me, I'm going to be taking the 659 puts here, but go ahead and take whatever you would like. I am wanting this to push upward probably about another 20 cents, but I am going to be looking to enter into this put entry regardless. So, okay, so on this push, we will be entering these puts. Okay. Now, again, these puts are going to be taken to the 559.74 range. Very good entry here. We should see, again, roughly a whole $2 downside with these puts. So they should be very nice positions. Now, we're going to take a look at our VVIX. It did pull down quite a bit to a new low of the day. We are going to be looking for this to start pulling upward towards the 20 ma. 20 ma is currently at 123, so we are expecting roughly a whole, $4 to $5 of upside within the VVIX here. So I want to delete some of these other arrows now that we are within our positions. It's very, very clear that this is what we're looking for here. Simply just looking for the 20 ma. From that 20 ma, if you have runners, okay, and I'm saying if you have runners, this is only for the people that buy multiple contracts, then you can allow your runners to potentially run to the lower Bollinger if we're going to see that movement. Um, if you do not have runners, if you only have a single contract, then you cut it at that 20 ma. Simple as that. Yes, 0 DTE. I entered for me, I entered the 0 DT 659 puts. Again, we're just targeting this 659.75. And these are just 0 DTEs. I'm not looking for anything crazy off of these puts, other than this $2 downside, so. Sorry, just looking at my phone here for a moment. Everybody's puts here should be doing absolutely killer. And again, we're just being very patient, waiting for our 20 ma here. 20 ma again is at that 659.72. That 20 mile really shouldn't be moving too much now that we are seeing this downside movement. Now our VVIX 117.61. So again, it did pull down to the 117.15. So we are starting to see it buying up towards the upside. Buying upward in the VVIX is telling us that we will be pushing down within the SPY. So we should be seeing our level here. And Bitcoin, we are seeing a little bit of that rejection we talked about. Um, still a bit more room within that rejection. The 5 minute uh, middle Bollinger is currently at the 71. My timer's covering it up. Basically the 71,100 range. So we still have roughly $200 of downside within Bitcoin and give us much further than that though. QQQ, still plenty of downside. Semiconductors, been expecting this push downward. Should be getting this push down to the 341.68. Currently at the 343.83, so expecting roughly $2 of downside within semiconductors. SPY, we are still just holding our puts. We're seeing the VVIX continuing to climb. It basically just tapped 118. So dealers are hedging positions. They are buying for downside exposure. I do want to look at USO. USO is starting to see some major buying. Okay, well, not super major buying, but it's seeing some buying. It's seeing buying that it is invalidating this bearish structure to the downside. Okay, so this cup right here is still in play, and we will be watching for that. SPY continuing our downside here, looking very good. Again, our middle Bollinger is at that 659.71. So when we hit that 659.70 range, people who only have a single put, you will be cutting those puts there. If you have multiple puts, you'll be cutting essentially 80% of your puts right there and leaving runners to run. And that will be a very successful trade for today. And we'll be waiting for the next setup. So waiting for our level should hit. Still roughly a whole 80 cents to the downside, so just be very patient. That's worth a whole lot of money. Okay. Our VVIX is pulling upward while this is occurring, so this is telling us we will be getting our downside extremely likely. The VVIX is at 118.40 currently, so this is telling us extremely likely our downside hits. I'm going to mute my mic for literally about 30 seconds just to drink some coffee, so I'll be right back. On that note, I really dislike this lavender coffee creamer my wife got. Anyway, okay, we're still waiting for our exit. Um, Nothing's changed here. Our VVIX is still uh, pushing upward. So while we're seeing the SPY seeing a little bit of upside here, our downside level should be almost certainly locked in. We're seeing the VVIX at 118.53. So dealers are hedging the downside, being very, very patient for that exit. QQQ is telling us that we also have room on this exit as well. QQQ should be seeing um the the 592.40. It's currently at 594, so we still have roughly a whole $1.60 downside. Semiconductors, roughly the same story here. We still have about a whole $2 of downside on semiconductors, so we'll be holding the puts for that, even if we see a little bit of a push upward within SPY. A lot of our symbols are telling us that there is room to the downside, and being patient for that will be very, very rewarding. So I am waiting for that. Now, I do want to pull up the news just in case anything is going on. So, one moment, let me just read all this nonsense. So yeah, even Russia's questioning all the contradictory statements from everybody on the Iran situation. Yeah, I mean, we have one side saying, "Oh yeah, we're negotiating peace deals and everything," and the other side saying, nope, never happened." And circling back to our VVIX, yes, we're going to be staying within these puts. We are seeing our VVIX continuing to stay elevated and pushing upward, is now at 119. So continue to hold those puts. Our downside should be coming. Our ADL is tapering out slightly. 30-minute time frame, it does show some fair strength on it though. Do want to circle to the 1-minute time frame here. 1-minute time frame, we do have a very good looking head and shoulders starting to form here. So we are expecting some fair bit of rejection. Okay, good. That is good. That looks very good. We should be getting our downside. The VVIX is telling us we should be getting our downside. Let's circle back to HIG. HIG is slightly telling us we're going to get our downside. Um, only down 6 cents. Not a whole lot, but in the world of HIG it is. So, okay, starting to see the downside securing here. Now again, we're looking at the 659.70. Doesn't matter if we're seeing the VVIX starting to become elevated and whatnot. Again, if you only have the single contract, you cut at that level. Doesn't matter. You don't worry about what you're potentially leaving on the table. Okay, it doesn't matter if we have, all the way down to the 656 or, the 646 today. Okay. Um, that's not how we trade these scalps. Um, you allow those runners to run those further positions, but if you only have the single position, you take the trade that you can physically see. And again, I always use the bird in the bush analogy, but you can only see the single bird in the bush. You're going to aim at it and take your shot. Um, if you're a good hunter, then you're going to hit it. That's what we're trying to do here. Take the single shot, hit the bird that we see. From that, you know, we go home with our bird. We're not trying to hunt the entire bush. Potentially, there could be, you know, a million birds in that bush. There could be zero, besides the one that we see. So that's the ideology behind it. But anyway, do you want to circle back to the VVIX here? Still seeing it push upward. It is at 119.40. So we're still looking for our downside here. Seeing this head and shoulders on the 1 minute time frame here starting to play out should be pushing us into our expected level on the 5 minute time frame, which would be again at that 659.70. So we're still looking for our exit. VVIX at 119.22. Still looking very, very good here. Continue holding the puts. Off cough non-financial advice. Hate having to say that, but now many of our other symbols here as well are still telling us that we do have plenty of downside. Semiconductors, again, we should be seeing a whole $1.20-ish downside on that. Q should be seeing, I don't know why my timer keeps covering up the 20-minute time frame, or the 20 mil here. Um, QQQ, we should be seeing roughly a whole dollar downside. SPY, we should be seeing roughly that 70 cent downside, 80 cent downside. So everything's correlating that we should really be expecting that level. I'm gonna keep the news open here. Nothing yet. Still looking for our exit. VVIX is at 119.14. So just continuing to be very, very patient here. Again, many of our signal or many of our symbols are telling us that we do have the downside. Microsoft here, starting to see some bearish structure. So that can be alluding to potential downside. NVIDIA still has room to push within its 20 mil. So roughly about 20 cents down. Sorry, I was looking at the ADL. No, roughly about 20 cents down. Um, One thing we need to determine if this is going to be basically they sell this 20 mile range and buy upward very quickly, or if they're going to turn the day bearish. So that's really what I'm looking for currently. VVIX is at 119.10, so pulling down very slightly, but again, we have been seeing this starting to buy upward. This should continue. Still waiting for our exit. Check that one time frame. Okay, so 1 minute time frame doing a 20 mile retest here at the 660.82. Should reject that level. Sorry, I'm like microphone's almost in my mouth. Anyway, should reject that level. Should pull down to the lower Bollinger, which would correlate with the 5 minute time frame, giving us our 20 mile, which would be that 659.70. So we are still looking for that. VVIX pulled up pretty aggressively. So it's at 119.38, or was at 119.48, pulled down to 119.36. So we are seeing it still being bought upward. Give us our move to the downside. Now I want to look at HIG. Nothing remarkable there. Liquid seeing a little bit of selling on the 5 minute time frame. We should be expecting it pulling back to the 108, basically the 108.40 range. Nvidia starting to pull down that 20 minute or that 5 minute time or the 20 mile, excuse me. Can't talk. What's the downside target on SPY? Yep, exactly. It's at 659.70. After that, we will basically evaluate everything from that position. Now, with these puts, again, you will be exiting the majority of positions at that 20 minute time frame, or saying 20 minute time frame, the 20 mile. Excuse me, I'm losing my sense today. Um, at that 20 mile, majority of the puts will be exited. If you have any runners, you let them run to the lower Bollinger, which is currently at the 657.20. Okay. Now, I do want to take a look at my phone because I will be exiting a majority of the puts at that level, and our level is currently at the 659.66, so it is starting to pull downward. That is a bearish signal overall with the 20 mile pulling downward. So, can see potentially continuation into the day with that. Do want to circle back to the VVIX. Now, when I do eventually get my computer set up, I will have it so the VVIX will always be on the screen. Um, while we're looking at SPY and everything else. So that way we can just easily monitor that. But we are seeing the VVIX continuing to buy upward. Again, every single penny the VVIX is buying upward. That means a dealer is actively going out and purchasing insurance. So, um, very, very bearish signal. Still looking for the exit, even if we are seeing a little bit of chop in here. I am looking for the rejection in here in the 1 minute time frame because we don't want this to form a cup to the upside because that would allude to potentially forming that handle and pushing upward. So we're not looking for that. As that happens, okay. This might be a day where we might have to add to the puts. VVIX had a pretty significant pull down there. It was at the 119. It pulled down to the 118.89, so still very elevated, but that was a bit of a push downward. Now, I want to see if there's any news that's correlating with this price action. Okay, hold on. Okay, so under a potential deal, the US would seek to retrieve Iran's enriched uranium. Not really seeing. Okay, so this news is from, I believe, Starmer. Yeah, really nothing coming out in the news. So check the 1 minute time frame here. With this cup completing on the 1 minute time frame, we should be expecting the rejection down to the 660.76 to complete the handle. Now, if we see this buy from that 20 minute or from that 20 mile on the 1 minute time frame, which again is at that 660.76, that would be telling us that we can be, completing this micro cup and handle to the upside. However, again, we are looking for our 20 mile on the 5 minute time frame. Many of our symbols are telling us that we should be hitting this level. So currently that level is at the 659.72. So basically holding right where we've been discussing majority of the morning. I want to look at USO and our volatility again. USO pulled up basically the 112, came back down to the 111.56. So potentially doing a 5 mile test to the upside here, because we are seeing quite a bit of buying from this 20 mile range. So potentially that oil volatility can be creating the conditions to sell within the SPY. So we will be watching that. Now, VVIX, it is back up to the 119.63. So very, very bearish in terms of what is going on with the VVIX here. Glad I held my puts. I do still believe I'm very convinced that we're going to be seeing our level. Currently at the 659.77, so pulling up slightly with that move upward. Okay, so this news was that the United States is having talks with Iran's parliament leaders. US Energy Secretary, there could be another release of strategic petroleum reserves. Highly unlikely though. I want to watch USO and our volatility. So our volatility still super high, 119.67. Our oil is still holding that 20 mile range at the 111.54. It is at the 111.70, but I am expecting this being a 20 mile retest on the 5 minute time frame to the upside for oil. So I am expecting this cup to complete. We will be watching that very carefully. VVIX pulling down very, very slightly, so 119.54. One-minute time frame, potentially seeing that bounce we're talking about. I am looking for a rejection here. So this is very, very crucial to see whether we get that rejection or bounce. VVIX is at 119.43. So we should be seeing the rejection overall, but We will see if the trade gods want to spite me or not. VVIX pulling down very slightly, so at 119.11. My daughter's up, sorry if you can hear her in the background. Still looking for our exit here. I do believe conditions are still all fully present. Now the exit is at the 660.80. No, incorrect. I was looking at the 1 minute time frame there. It's at the 659.80, so has pulled up by 10 cents. Still looking for that level though. USO seeing a little bit of selling here. And I am expecting this 20 mile range to be bought up, so we will be watching for that. A little bit of a rejection in VVIX here, but still super elevated. There is two massive share orders just now on SPY. Um, two share orders of 180,000 shares each. So decently large candles there on the selling side. VVIX slowly starting to pull back up towards that 119. Still just looking for this very stubborn exit. Yeah, they said we were already in talks with Iran, um, when some of Iran said that wasn't the case. But potentially there's different parties in Iran right now that are doing these talks, so we'll see how that works. Okay, now I want to look at semiconductors. We are seeing this pulling down. I want to draw. So semiconductors did briefly touch the 5 minute 20 mile. Again, the 5 minute 20 mile is at the 342.24. So it did briefly touch that. That can create the conditions where SPY can bounce without touching that 20 mile. So that is why I'm looking at that. QQQ. Oh no, I have this on my phone. I apologize. QQQ. I don't think we saw the same thing there, but I want to double check. The most brief 20 mile touch right there on QQQ on the 5 minute time frame. That can create the reprieve to the upside, but we are seeing bearish structure there, so I am looking for that to continue. Sorry, my daughter's knocking on the door. SPY still looking for our downside. VVIX is at 118.95, so it is pulling up. Hold on, let me say hi to my daughter really quick. Sorry, everybody. I'm going to be mute just for a couple minutes, just because I do have to get my daughter ready. Um, I'm going to be around though, so I will be right back. All right, I'm back, everybody. Sorry about the mute. Okay, so let's see what's going on. Now, I do kind of want everybody to be watching their own SPY for a moment here because I want to cycle through a bunch of different symbols. And I don't want you to potentially miss any entries or anything. From the news point of view, we are hearing that the United States is talking with Iran's parliament leader. Um, According to multiple sources. So potentially we could be seeing either an upward or downward massive break in terms of a catalyst. Okay, so I know that doesn't help, but that's something we do have to contend with currently. Bitcoin, we are seeing some bearishness. Reason why I'm saying bearishness is because we have been pulling from the upper Bollinger through the 20 month seeing consolidation and now very likely forming a head and shoulders to pull down towards that lower Bollinger. Selling on Bitcoin, usually selling on SPY or selling within overall equities. Now DXY has been pulling down. That's somewhat expected with seeing the oil prices pull down quite a bit today. However, I do expect this to pull back upward if we're going to be seeing some real selling on the day. Oil has been pulling down quite a bit since we last looked at it. That's obviously how we got our major upside push in the buy and everything. Very news driven currently, but we do see the lower Bollinger being pushed on the 5-minute time frame, which does create the conditions to pull back upward. So as long as there isn't some sort of news catalyst or anything telling us, that oil's going to sell off, then we should be expecting the upside from here. VVIX at 117.29, so it did pull back from that 20 mile range. Didn't fully hit it, but it got very close and is now pulling back. We'll see if it continues down into the lower Bollinger here, or if we will see it pull back up and create a move. Now, what we're starting to see here is really large narrowing of the Bollingers. So from earlier this morning, you could see how there was a lot of range in those Bollinger room, and currently there really isn't a whole lot of room. This is telling us that very likely there's going to be a major breakout to the upside or downside. Now, I know that part doesn't help, but this is telling us that volatility is, you know, largely brewing to create conditions for a breakout. Um, One way expecting a fairly large move today. Now, SPY, still just waiting for that 20 mile. Now, the exit on position pretty much blew up. We did not get the exact exit we wanted. Um, we did see QQQ and semiconductors barely touch their 20 mile, and from that 20 mile touch, they had a major bounce. Unfortunately, that can happen. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes that can happen. Okay, and we just happen to get caught in that. So, missed that first exit. Now, with the second exit, if we have any of these first positions, they will not be worth as much unless we sell down to the lower Bollinger. Okay, so be aware of that. If you're still holding some of these puts from earlier, which I still am holding a fair amount of them, if you're still holding them, they won't be worth it when we go to sell them later. Okay, but our exit will still be at that 20 mile. The 20 mile currently is at the 660.82, so it has pulled up, roughly a whole dollar since that last. So that's why I'm saying our downside has kind of shrunk a little bit. Now that doesn't mean that the downside on the day is done. Um, we are seeing a lot of bullish structure starting to form. We are seeing the VVIX overall pulling back on the day. But the overall, hold on, I want to read this news. Okay, nothing important yet. Sorry. Every one of these news things, I want to make sure we're not missing anything very crucial right now. So anyway, okay, our technical second exit is currently occurring. Um, we are seeing the VVIX still extremely elevated, so don't miss this opportunity to take that exit. Okay. However, I do think we're going to be seeing some further downside, but again, do not miss that opportunity. Okay. The worst thing you want to happen here is to not have an exit on those puts. Um, because even currently for me, my previous puts are barely green. They're green by 3%. So that's a win in my book still. Um, starting to have a little bit of a bounce. Yep, there's that bounce we talked about. Okay, now for our next position, we're just waiting at this point. We're not taking calls. We're not, um, taking anything off of this 20 mile. We're just simply waiting for, again, either the upper Bollinger or lower Bollinger. So we'll be waiting for the next entry. Now I want to circle USO that we're waiting. Seeing a little bit of buying occurring here. Nothing super indicative just yet. VVIX still just kind of chopping here, waiting for a really major breakout or rejection. The no major news just yet. My charts are being a little slow right now. Now, something interesting on QQQ here is that potentially this cup that is trying to form a handle, this handle can be validating it. A little bit further push down, and this micro cup right here will be invalidated, um, which does turn this micro cup not into a micro cup, but instead turns it more into of a double top. Okay, so we are watching for that. We're going to be seeing if again this continues into that cup and handle. Cup and handle would be expecting the push back up to the upper Bollinger on the 5-minute time frame, or the rejection from this level to really invalidate this previous cup needs to pull down to the 592.59, and this is on QQQ. So looking for that. Yeah, can be seeing quite a bit of selling from that. Now I want to look at USO. I want to look at VVIX. USO seeing a little bit of buying. So again, from that lower Bollinger, we are expecting the buying to pick up basically back up towards that middle Bollinger, which is at the 110 on oil upside. Now, pretty much any oil upside is going to be bearish for equities. So seeing how we are expecting that upside, we should be, somewhat expecting bearishness in equities as well. VVIX, I'm expecting the upside within VVIX. Um, Potentially a little head and shoulders here, but I don't really look for the structure too much within that. 20 mile on SPY here on the 5-minute time frame is at 660.98. So basically that's 661. If we see again breaking through that range, then this will allude to somewhat of that same double top pattern that we have within QQQ if we see QQQ breakdown. Okay, I want to look at, so here's QQQ. My internet just flickered, so I apologize if I disconnect or anything. Um, with that said, QQQ still has a little bit further downside to invalidate this previous bullish cup. Semiconductors has invalidated the previous bullish cup here. Um, is forming this head and shoulders. Again, with this head and shoulders forming, I am really looking towards the low of the morning, not so much the low of the day, um, because that would assume the pre-market, which we are not trying to take into account right now. I want to look at HIG and I want to look at liquid. Sorry, my charts are laggy. Okay, so HIG seeing a little bit of selling. Nothing too major yet, but every single penny in HIG sort of matters, so not really seeing that too much within liquid just yet, but we can start forming a little bit of a major head and shoulders here. And we do have a large liquidity range above here, so if we reject this liquidity range, then the expectation would be to continue further downward. SPY looking for a little bit further push downward to fully invalidate this previous potential cup here and to really solidify that as a double top. VVIX pulling back upward, but we need to see some real strength put into it. Sorry, I'm just looking at the news to see if anything has been popping up just yet. Nothing significant. So with the Bollingers starting to really compress together, um, again, this is really starting to tell me that a major move is getting ready to happen. Now, whether that major move is to the upside or the downside, still left to question, but we do have a few signals. One is that we have our early ranges on the day here in the pre-market where we hit this 66, excuse me, 666. Now, so far we haven't been able to really take that range back at all. Um, Largely it's been rejected. Each time we've tried to pull back to it, rejection, rejection. Okay, so that is a bearish signal on the day. Now, if we see this cup, which I know that's a smiley face right now, um, if we see this cup come fully invalidated with the formation of this inverse cup here, it would need to go back basically to the 660 range to do so. If we see that invalidate, then that really opens up this 656 range again, which I would expect the lower Bollinger to basically just start opening back up. The 20 mile would start pulling down, so I would expect that to occur. This would, at that point, start creating an inverse up to the downside. Um, so plenty of downside here if we're actually going to be seeing our downward break. Okay. Now, on the upside, again, um, the upside should be looking for the top of this liquidity, which is right at that 666.85, basically that 667 range. So, if you're trying to target that upside, cheap calls can do so pretty easily from this range, even as a hedge. So, um, yeah, that's that. VVIX is starting to pull back upward again. Um, okay, so Iran has two main demands to end the war: guarantees against future attacks and compensation for its losses. Good luck with that. Um, okay, so we're really watching to see if this is going to break down from here and create our double top, or if we're going to see our breakout. Okay, this is really the range for this to occur. To look really break down to me, honestly. However, the fact that we haven't fully invalidated some of these previous bullish structures is a little worrying. However, another 40 cents down from here would alleviate that worry quite a bit. I do have a phone call coming in, so I will be mute just for a couple minutes, everybody, but I'll be right back. All right, sorry for that. I am back. Okay, so great news. Invalidation of the previous bullish cup does look very good. Okay, here's our 1 minute time frame. Here's that very nice head and shoulders that has been created. And from that head and shoulders, I don't know why I pressed that. We now have this double top occurring. So our downside should start kicking in. Okay. Um, with that said, our VVIX is starting to pull upward, starting to get ready to retest this 20 mile range again. However, I'm looking for much higher than that. I'm looking for it to really start pushing back to the 120 range. Now, oil is continuing to see buying. It's almost at that 5 mile range, so we do have to be cautious that potentially it can have that rejection to the downside. Um, I don't really expect that though. Apologize if you can hear my dogs barking. And if it sounds like my mouth is like super saliva, like it just won't stop right now. Um, anyway, besides that, looking for USO to really start breaking out towards some of the levels of the day, the 112. So we will be keeping a very close eye on that. Still heading upward, 118.15. Our SPY starting to break down. Okay, great, great. This is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for the puts. Um, again, you should only be having running positions here. If any of you only have bought a single put and we're waiting for this exit and we're waiting for this exit, I'm gonna have to, you know, slap you with love. But besides that, you should be using the runners currently. Now, truly, we are looking for the low of the day here. However, do you have to be extremely cautious? Is that one? This can still be a cup right here. Okay, and with that being potentially a cup, this can still form a handle. Now that we're starting to push into this lower Bollinger, you know, just like I take calls at the upper Bollinger to the middle Bollinger, this is starting to create the conditions to take, or excuse me, take puts to the upper Bollinger to the middle Bollinger. This is creating the conditions to take calls from this lower Bollinger to the middle Bollinger. So potentially that gives us this cups handle. Okay. We have to be very, very cautious of this. Okay, because as bearish as this looks, this can absolutely blow your positions away. So be very, 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 very cautious of this handle. With that said, um, with this lower Bollinger push, if you are holding puts and you are expecting this further downside, we'll talk about a perfect place to hedge. Because if we're going to have the upside, it's going to be extreme upside from here. It's targeting basically the high of the morning, um, which would be at 666.85. So that's what the call upside. And the bearish downside would be targeting our low of this morning, which would be that 656 range. So very quality range to hedge with a call. Okay. If you are holding puts. If you're not holding puts, if you're just wanting to enter calls, um, I would be cautious. Again, this is still the area to do so. So, um, what I'm going to be doing here is because I'm a stubborn person. I apologize, but I'm going to be taking calls, to hedge my puts. So, I'm expecting much further downside. Hold on, I'm just trying to get some calls set up. Okay, so I'm taking the 663 calls. I don't want anything very expensive. I mean, they are purely just a hedge against a an upside push from this level. But I am expecting the downside push overall. So that is the goal. Now with oil, we are seeing some major buying at this 20 mile range. So if we continue to see buying, we continue to see that strength in here, we will very likely be pushing towards that 112, 113 range. So we are going to be looking for that. I am going to delete this up and handle here. It's because it's annoying to look at. And I do want to change this to darker red, just so that it is not so annoying to look at. Okay, we should be very set up, everybody. Everybody should be very set up in their positions right now. Yeah, I know, the market's making me drool. Um, don't squander profit, don't be greedy. Okay, make sure you have calls hedged. However, our downside looks super killer. Okay, it looks very, very, very good here. So, going to be looking truly for that 656 range. I really want to see this double top basically create that inverse cup on the day. So that is truly what I am looking for. Now I want to take a look at the VVIX. VVIX still extremely elevated. It is pushing upwards, so it's at the 118.61. Again, we're looking for this to push up towards that 120 range. Now everybody should be doing very, very well in their positions here. Now I want to look at IG and liquid. So we're continuing to see selling within HIG, with us starting to push under the 20 mile here. The expectation would be to push towards the lower Bollinger. So that would equate to more selling within equities. Bitcoin tended to see that downside. Should be expecting this inverse cup to play out, which would really allude to, you know, further selling within equities. It's not always a one-to-one correlation, but Bitcoin is heavily owned by institutions currently, so usually they trade Bitcoin in tandem with equities. Okay, so now that we have our puts that are extremely green, and we have our hedge calls that are slightly red. Also, there was a very large sell order here on buy. There was a sell order for 355,000 shares. So very, very large. Okay, people are starting to hedge positions again. I want to take a look at the news to see if there's anything going on with this. So Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson states that their position on the Strait of Hormuz and requirements for stopping the war remain unchanged. Iran foreign ministry spokesperson states that there were no discussions with the United States. Heck, man. Who do we believe? I mean, obviously we can't believe Iran. However, when your enemy is literally telling you that they haven't talked with us, kind of hard to say. Um, awesome. I love hearing you all make money. It's what I do this for, you know? It's not about the money though. It's about the freedom. You know, really that's what trading is. It's freedom. Even though you still have to wake up and do the Monday through Friday during the market hours, it's freedom. You know, you are your own boss. You get to navigate your own life the way that you want to navigate your own life. So that's really what I try to promote here. Um, Not so much about picking out random plays and having wins off those and stuff like that. The goal is to not need me. So with our current move, with this big old block of liquidity here, which I will show you how I identified this in a moment, this is telling us that the likelihood and extreme likelihood is that we will be seeing this. I won't tell you the exact level. The 656.14. So basically that's 656, but we roughly have, $2.40 of downside still to go. Now, how I got this liquidity range, and this is important, is that on our morning, we see that, okay, and this is the first point of any form of resistance in here. Okay, this is our first point of selling. This is our first point of support. Okay, well, generally support is going to be retested. Okay, if the level is any good. So if this is going to be a major bounce to the upside, for example, this level should be retested again. Okay, they want to make sure that this liquidity up here is actually solid. Now, with this being basically bounced out of almost immediately, this created this area of where we had price action within the earlier part of the day, and all of a sudden we're ignoring it. Well, why are we ignoring it? Either we're having actual conditions to change the narrative to ignore it, or we're ignoring it to re-enter it back later. So that's kind of the theory on that, is that dealers like to do this very often. They like to create these levels where there was very active price action trading within this range. During the early pre-market, there was quite a bit of trading during this in this range. And all of a sudden, second the market opens, that range is not valid anymore. Usually not how it works. So that's why we're targeting this range for liquidity. If we're going to see a further, breakdown from here, we should be targeting the bottom of that range. Now, I do want to circle back to the VVIX. Did pull all the way up, or no, it's still pulling up. Okay, this is still doing good. So it's at 118.86. Now, I do want to look at the news to see if anything. Explosions reported at U.S. bases in Kuwait. I shouldn't sound happy about that. I'm not happy about that. I hate war. I hate that there's conflicts, and I will be one of the first to say that I was actively shorting oil before this conflict started because I was against the war. I lost money due to that, so We'll put it there. With that said, hold on. Pakistan has positioned itself. It's a lead mediator trying to broker and end the US and the. Okay, so potentially we're going to be seeing a lot of today's buying just completely sold off if what we're reading is really true, that a lot of these talks that the United States and everybody's saying they're having really aren't going down, which is weird. Very weird tactics. Yeah, definitely looking for this low of the early morning. This inverse cup should be closing to the downside there. Now, I'm just being very eyes on with the news right now, just because we're hearing so much different, um, narratives out of everybody. Kind of insane. Look at USO. Yep, big buying in USO again, so we're back up to the 111. We talked about how very likely we would try to, bounce out of this liquidity range. So far, we are seeing that. If this is going to hold and take, then we will be seeing, this 112 plus range holding. So potentially the selling on the day can get extreme, depending on how false the earlier narrative was, with the peace talks and everything. We're seeing the VVIX just skyrocket. Currently, it's at 119.72, so it is absolutely taking off right now. Um, this is potentially the type of day where we could see the entire range taken out, which I talked about that this morning. This is alluding to basically taking out this whole level on the day. I don't really expect that, but this selling is starting to get very extreme here. This inverse cup, and I want to give you the exact level. So it will be closing right at the 656.07 on the 1 minute time frame. You can see this getting ready to close very well. Now, when we hit the bottom of this inverse cup, you close your puts. Do you hear me? You close your puts, you close your hedge calls, you close everything. You re-enter calls at that point. Okay. Um, that's how you trade that. 100%. Non-financial advice, but that's how that's traded. So, bottom of the cup, what we expect, just like bottom of every inverse cup, bullish structure. From this bullish structure, this would give us a handle to the upside. Handle to the upside would create potentially a very large head and shoulders here, but it would give us, multiple dollars of upside. Okay, so don't squander this exit, don't squander this entry. Make sure you take advantage of both ends of it. I'm actually starting to close hedge calls here just because I am extremely, extremely confident that the puts will be heading down to our range. And I'm getting ready to close the puts any second. I have my finger on the button, just waiting. VVIX is at 120.71. So our level should be almost a certainty here. Okay, we're going to be very, very patient. Our puts are building up absolute absurd premium. So allow this additional 60, 70 cents to go through. It's going to be worth it. Now, once we sell these puts, okay, we need to be looking at the 558 calls. Basically the 556 through 559. I'm going to be taking the 5, but the 559 is acceptable. It does take you close to that 5 mile range again, or the 20 mile range on the 5 minute time frame. So that would be acceptable. But I'll be personally taking the 658s, riding them up towards that 20 mile range, and waiting for our next entry from there. VVIX is at 121.08, so that sucker is still soaring. Okay, and I'm starting to exit my puts here, just so that I can properly be positioned within my calls. I've exited the puts, and I am now trying to snag some calls. Again, I want the 658s. I'm taking 658 calls now, and win. And now we wait. So, okay, our next position here. I do want to label this because we did have a very, very killer position here. So from our exit up here, I did write it all the way down, exited, finished right at the bottom of this cup. Perfect, awesome exit. Now, from our calls, we are targeting, again, the 20 mile. Now, the 20 mile is at the 660.51, so we do have potentially a whole $4, $5 of upside. So hopefully we can sit back, relax, and let these calls do some work. Our calls should already be up. Mine are already up 12%, starting to do good. Now, we are expecting bullish structure to build in here, so while this can just be some immediate bounce like we're seeing, the real expectation would be for the 1 minute time frame to build some actual bullish structure like a cup and handle, inverse head and shoulders, something to show us that we're actually going to be seeing the upside from here. Okay. Other than just, from the technicals. VVIX still very, very, very elevated, okay? It's at 121.77. It is in the upper Bollinger. Excuse me. Yeah, 0 DT calls. I apologize. Um, the VVIX is in the upper Bollinger, which does mean that it can now pull down towards the middle Bollinger again. Doesn't mean that's going, the selling absolutely can continue, but my expectation would be for it to pull down to the middle Bollinger, basically back towards that 118.63, 119 range. Give us a little bit of reprieve within these calls, and from there, give us our 20 mile on the SPY 5 minute time frame as well. So that's what we're looking for. That's the expectation. to delete some of these arrows as they are fairly. Okay, our calls are doing very well. Again, our exit's going to be much closer to that 660 range. So we still have, quite a bit of upside. Hopefully everyone is doing absolutely good on their days so far. We've had three very quality trades, almost four, but well, I at least missed this entry just by a split second. It did not push down quite as far as I wanted, so we did miss the calls on that entry, which those would have been really great. So I do apologize for that. Um, that was a missed opportunity. However, hopefully you could what the point was, why I missed that opportunity. So we'll mark that in white as a missed opportunity that we potentially were going to enter. So success, success, and so far our next position we're looking for, or we're in now, is the 0DT calls. Now, I want to go to the daily time frame here for a second, because again, we're at a very key level. We talked about how we can be testing not just the upper bounds of the 5 mile today, but the lower bounds of the 5 mile. Well, currently the 5 mile being at the 658.31, that means that the lower bounds can be at this, I could talk right, can be at this 656.30 range. So we are at the 656.60. We did hit that 655.80, which does correlate towards that lower or that bottom uh bounds of the 5 mile. So potentially this could be that lower bounds of the 5 mile test to fully retest the level. Okay. Not a position I want to set up dated anything on really right now. Especially with some of the sentiment going on with the conflict in Iran and everything. I'd rather be fairly neutral in our positions. Um, yeah, another release from Iran's parliament leader. Not had any talks with the United States. Quotes, no talks have been held with the United States. Iran's parliament speaker says fake news used to manipulate oil markets. Okay, so that can definitely be telling us there's some massive downside if the market is not going to be buying the story coming from the United States and everything. Which, you know, surprisingly enough, this is something we talked about in the Discord earlier, that potentially this news from Israel and United States could be fake. This could be used to, create a new position within the conflict. So, um, it's something we did have in mind. It's just very surprising to see it actually somewhat occur in real time. Now, again, I'm still holding my calls here. Even with the potentially very bearish sentiment coming through that this conflict could be all just, or the talks could just all be a farce. Um, so far that's what the Iranian side is saying. So, um, looking at that, we're gonna play the devil's advocate here and just assume that market isn't going to buy this news from the United States and Iran. That means we need to hedge a put. Okay. I want a 645. It's cheap. And again, this is a 0 DTE. I'm not looking for this to really be anything other than a hedge to the calls, but I do think that with all the different sentiment going on, it's worth having a little bit of positions on both ends, especially because this downside today can, potentially be a whole $15 from where we are right now. It's definitely worth having a hedged position. Okay. The upside from here be a whole $10. So really, really, really listen. Really hedge these positions. Okay. The upside, I'm gonna make this as apparent as possible. Downside, so please make sure you have those positions hedged. Okay. Um, let's really catch this breakout, whether it's going to be a massive upside or some massive downside. We want to catch the break. Okay. Um, with that said, I want to look at USO. It has pulled up towards that 113. It is pulling back slightly. I'm not seeing anything in the news just yet that's changing any of the current sentiment, so very likely this is forming a cup, bear structure at the top of the cup to create the handle, and aiming to break out. Okay, so this is very, very bearish on the day. Our VVIX, we're expecting a very small reprieve in here, which that might be just the call reprieve we're looking for. Um, but this is still super, super, super elevated. Okay. So within SPY, what I'm really expecting to happen here, and with these hedged puts, what I will be doing is I am assuming we're going to pull up towards this 20 mile range. Okay. When we get to that 20 mile range, I'm going to be exiting my calls, and I will be doing something that I don't recommend everybody else to do, which is I will be adding or to the put positions. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm going to be adding to the put positions once we get towards that 20 mile, and instead of waiting for some upper Bollinger range, is because this turns into a head and shoulders. Puts from the range that we have currently, the hedged puts, they will be red when we get up here, but adding to those puts and actually having the breakdown from that range would give us a very, very large downside, and those hedged puts would be, back in the money. So that's the theory on that. That's what I'm going to be looking for to reclaim some of that current lost weight on those hedged put positions. Sorry I can't talk sometimes. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Not like a stutter or anything. I just suck at talking. 21 on the 5-minute time frame is at this 659.84. So really been hovering around that 659.70 range for majority of the day, but that does mean we will be looking at that 659.80 for the call exit, assuming we get our calls to the upside, or the movement to the upside anyway. So yeah, I think that's going to be the plan, is that once we hit 20 ma, I'll be the majority of my calls there, leaving a few runners just in case we start heading up towards the high of the day, but very likely that will form a head and shoulders, you know, potentially pushing us down massively, massively, massively on the day. Um, so I will be continuing to add a few more puts at that position. Um, Usually I would say this might be a potential opportunity for a swing. To swing some puts into tomorrow. I would not do that under the current conditions because the narrative is so choppy. And again, just, potentially false news today took us all the way from the 641 up to the 666, almost the 667. We don't want to risk, um, you know, hundreds or thousands of dollars in the overnight currently. Okay. So let's try to keep our trades in the 0 DT time frame, just in the current, run of things, and we will find a opportunity to position some longer calls and whatnot for the upside. So okay, so that's gonna be the plan, everybody. Um, looking. Okay, so just from Iran, Iran's Revolutionary Guards say they've launched a new attack on targets in Israel and U.S. bases in the region. Okay, so again, potentially the conflict is not ceasing. So if we get, you know, true real reports where everything today has just been, basically just folly, then we will be seeing the SPY drop very, very, very drastically. So that's why we're hedged currently. Um, we're expecting this 20 mile exit to the upside with our calls, but with the current sentiment on the overall market, I do think that there's a very large, potential that we could be having a very large sell-off today. So, with that said, though, I do need to get ready to head out very soon here. So, if there's any final questions for the day, now's a great time to ask. I'd be happy to go over anything. But everybody should be on the same page for the entries and exits on, the current 0 DT positions. While we're at this lower bounds of the 5 mile as well, it's a great time to be looking at the VVIX, seeing what it's doing. Currently, it's pulling back slightly, so it is telling us very likely we should be seeing that 20 mile exit within the SPY towards the upside on the 5 minute time frame. With QQQ, do have this inverse cup formed. So all the previous bullish structure on the day has been invalidated. That double top did play out very well. With this inverse cup playing, or finishing, we should be expecting the handle to pull upward to continue to break back down if we're going to be pushing further downward. So that alludes to our call exit and our put entry. Got the same thing going on here with semiconductors, the bullish structure of the day, and actually the entirety of the bullish structure of the day has been broken. Um, which is interesting to see. I did not fully expect that. And USO, we are expecting a push into the upper Bollinger. So that would definitely allude towards that 114, 116 range. Yeah, this news today has thrown me for a loop. I'll tell you what. Activation of Iranian air defenses in some regions. Yeah, I'm really expecting this to all just be some crazy psyop and the market to just completely sell off from it. But we will see. Now, the hedged calls, if we don't get our exit here, it's entirely okay. If we're going to be getting our downside, we can allow those calls to burn to zero, and we will be immeasurably profitable, okay, because we have our puts. Our put downside is right now, okay? It is massive, massive, massive. So the exit on the puts today, um, really, I'm gonna be digging deep because if we're gonna be selling off, it's because the market does not trust the narrative coming out of the United States, which means that all this buying that we had in the free market is just a fair value gap. Fair value gap is basically like a bump in the road, and that's how I always describe it is, if you're driving your car and, the road's supposed to be flat, level, and straight, but we have a small bump or a rock on the road or something that's not supposed to be there. Um, Very likely, if this news is what we're expecting it to be, then this is just that rock in the road when the road was meant to be flat, okay? Um, That's what a fair value gap is. So it's just basically a huge liquidity grab, pulls back to the level we were trading at, so back to the straight road, and just grabs all that liquidity. So that's what I'm looking for to the downside is that very, very, very potentially um, the entirety of today's news can be sold off. So the good put 0 DT entry, um, technically you should be in one right now. Even though it's not the best entry, uh, you should technically have a call and a put, um, at this level. And the reason why is because the sentiment could really pulls upward roughly a whole $10 to $12 on the day, or pulls downward a whole $15. So the range on the day is massive. So I highly suggest having both a call and a put. Um, with that said, we had the call entry at this lower Bollinger, but we're seeing this starting to break down. And let's see, Iran's Revolutionary Guards claim they performed a new attack on locations in Israel. Okay, yeah, we already knew about that. Um, Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But with this call entry being there, the news narrative may not allow us to pull back up towards that 20 mile range, which then that would mean that those calls are going to burn. Um, I don't want your calls to burn. Uh, that's not what we're aiming for here. We want to make money. So if your calls are going to burn, then make sure you have a put to catch that burn. Because again, there is an absolute absurd amount of downside today. So make sure you catch a bit of it. I would not worry about theta burn with today's sentiment. The IV is going to be far too strong, um, depending on where that sentiment is really going to lean. So, for example, if the selling sentiment is really going to start picking up, then the IV and um sorry, the IV and the delta are just going to absolutely trump any theta burn. We shouldn't be seeing a lot of chop in here. based at the levels we're at. I'd be very surprised to see chop at this range. We've already seen kind of that chop area where we saw the Bollingers pull into each other. Now they're starting to expand. We're starting to see some really expansive movements, meaning we saw a lot of upside earlier in the market today. Now that we're seeing downside, it's actively pulling against our 20 mall, which means that this is going to be continuing to pull the lower Bollinger downward. So that downside is opening up basically every second. Um, so yeah, I'm not too worried about the theta burn for the day. I don't think that today's the type of day where we're going to be seeing a whole ton of chopping. Um, Really, it should be we're either going to sell off or the news is going to come in that everything was true and we're going to buy it up. We are below the 5 mile currently on the daily time frame. We're below the lower bounds of the 5 mile as well. So we're below our support. What we do have below us is the lower Bollinger. We did just exit that range. However, with this fair value gap potentially being here, we can hit the bottom of that fair value gap first before continuing that move back up to the 5 mile. But with the 5 mile being tested both on the upper bounds and the lower bounds today, technically we can push all the way back down to the lower Bollinger and restart the lower Bollinger push if the market truly wanted to. Very weird day, not what I was expecting at all, but yeah, this is what we have to work with. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not really expecting the chop. These are these are kind of the positions I'm willing to hold until the end of the day. Um, Almost until close, just due to the narrative and the sentiment and everything going on. Our VVIX is also super, super, super elevated. Remember, every single penny above $98 that this is means that dealers are actively hedging positions. Um, you know, this thing is absolutely screaming right now in terms of how elevated it is. So the selling can pick up very, very greatly. Really expecting this liquidity range to be broken. Once we break into that range, I really expect the selling to start kicking in. At what strike would I cut the calls? Um, that's a super good question. I'm gonna give you an answer to that. Answer to that would be at this 30-minute 20 mile range. Okay. Because out of any support, that's kind of our nearest support. Other than the 10-minute time frame, 15-minute, 20-minute time frame. 30-minute time frame is really telling us that the price wants to gravitate towards this 651.84. Um, Anything below that is you know any chance of a bounce is kind of just out of the question from there. Um, so that's when I would cut the call at that point. Um, but today's kind of the day where I don't mind having my call burned at absolutely $0. Um, as the downside's going to pay off the entirety of the call plus profit on the put. Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Glad you all appreciate the analysis and everything else, and hopefully it helps you all be profitable in your trades. With that said, I am going to head out for the day. I will be in chat a little later, but I do have to get ready for an appointment. I will be putting out the short form form version of the video tonight, going over the standard SPY and everything. And I am going to be putting out a pretty long video, very likely today, going over the expectations for the next 3 to 6 months out over the majority of the market. So that should be out later this afternoon or this evening. Um, Other than that, I will talk to you all later. I hope you have a great day. Hopefully you made some good money today. And yeah, I'm bad with goodbyes, so